Hey, we're back, and I've got some great news for you Ford lovers out there. Last year, we introduced our Holley high ram EFI intake for the 9.5 deck height engines, and this year, we released it for the 8.2 deck height 289-302 engines. And today, Scott McLaughlin, our Director of Sales here at Holley, was kind enough to bring in his beautiful 64 Ford Falcon Sprint so we can do an intake swap. Well, actually, I'm going to watch him do the intake swap. We're also going to install the MSD 6 EFI box, as well as a Holley dual sync distributor. So follow along as I watch Scott get his hands a little greasy. Before performing any steps, you should first remove the negative battery cable from your battery. This not only helps prevent a fire hazard, but can also save your electronics should you accidentally short a wire. Our first step is to drain the coolant from the engine. Scott's using compressed air to help remove any leftover coolant that may be in the intake. This is a great idea since any remaining coolant in the intake could actually spill into the lifter valley when it's removed. The next step is to remove your carburetor, or in our case, the Holley 4-barrel EFI throttle body. It's not always necessary, but it can make access to some of the bolts easier and also helps lighten the load a little when it comes time to remove your intake. Before the distributor comes out, I like to mark the plug wire locations and firing order for future reference. Now remove all the plug wires from the spark plugs. Now that the plug wires are free, we can remove them along with the distributor cap. Now Scott is loosening the hose clamps and removing the upper radiator hose and the intake to water pump hose. He'll also have to remove the two hoses going to the heater core. A small hose pick can come in real handy and help get those stubborn hoses off, especially if they've been on there for a long time. Next, the fuel supply and return lines will need to come off. In Scott's case, he was able to reuse his old fuel system on the new high ram intake with only slight modifications. Depending on your current setup, it may be necessary to upgrade your current fuel system to one that's capable of supporting EFI. Be sure to keep plenty of rags handy to catch any fuel that may drain out of any lines. Once all the hoses and wiring is clear, Scott can remove the injector wiring and any sensors or wires associated with the EFI system. Now Scott's ready to remove the intake bolts. Notice that he waited to remove the distributor until after all the bolts had been removed. Better safe than sorry. No one wants to hear that sound of a loose bolt dropping into their engine. Before you completely remove the distributor, take note of the direction that the rotor is pointed. I like to take a picture with my camera phone for future reference. Grab the distributor housing and pull it straight up to remove it. With everything removed, we can now remove the old intake. Very seldom will you be able to just lift the old intake off without a struggle. Sticky gasket material and ridiculous amounts of RTV can really grab hold of it, so your best bet is to use a pry bar to help free it. Make sure there's plenty of material wherever you decide to pry. The last thing you want to do is break off a chunk of your intake, or worse yet, the water pump. Notice the coolant that leaked out and into the lifter valley when he removed the intake. Try to soak up as much of this as possible. Scott's going to change the oil when the install is finished and remove any of the coolant that may have made its way down into the oil pan. Before we install the new gaskets and intake, you'll need to clean and remove any old gasket material or silicone left on the head and china wall surfaces. A good razor blade will get the majority of it off, and then you can follow it up with a rag or Scotch-Brite and some brake cleaner to remove the rest. Some paper towels or a large rag laid in the lifter valley will help catch any unwanted material from dropping into your engine. Once all the surfaces are clean and carefully inspected, you can now install the new gaskets. I like to apply plenty of RTV to both the front and back china wall surfaces. This method seems to seal up both ends nicely. Now carefully align the bolt holes of the intake with the mounting holes in your heads and slowly set the new intake down onto the engine. I like to install the mounting bolts finger tight first. This assures me that the intake is correctly positioned on the engine. Once you're happy with the final fit, you can torque the intake down. Be sure you follow the manufacturer's recommended torque specs as well as the torque sequence. Scott's now ready to drop in his dual sync distributor. Since the installation is different for both clockwise and counterclockwise rotating engines, make sure that you follow the directions set forth in the instruction manual to ensure proper operation. With the dual sync installed, we can now install the cap and plug wires and connect the distributor and 6 EFI box to the existing wiring harness. Scott topped off his high ram with a 90mm Holley black throttle body to help keep that murdered theme going under his hood. He did, however, run into some clearance issues with the air intake and radiator and fan. We'll have to check back later and see just how he resolved this issue. Holley offers throttle cable brackets for our high ram intakes, but Scott made his own bracket to avoid any unwanted interference issues with his hood. With all the wiring complete and a fresh oil change, Scott's Falcon was ready to fire. That's good. Well, that pretty much wraps up our install of the Holley EFI high ram intake on Scott's 64 Falcon. If you'd like to learn more about the Holley EFI high ram intakes for your 8.2 or 9.5 Ford engine, visit our website at holley.com.